Welcome to FinFactor. I'm your host, Blaine, co-founder and CEO at Dry Run Cash Flow Forecasting Software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind, delivering clear and accurate forecasts to the management team. And joining me today is Morgan Hines, the head of partnerships at Navan, where they help businesses reduce the massive expense that comes from managing business travel. Thanks for joining me, Morgan.
Thanks so much for having me, Blaine. I really appreciate it.
And the reason we kind of got into this topic, and I wanted you on the show, is we were talking a few weeks ago. We just met, and you were telling me literally like the impact that travel expense has on businesses. But the crazy part was, it wasn't even the travel expense; it was the management expense and the sort of overages that reached incredible amounts. I wanted to dig into that first, like. How much are these expenses? How much do they impact businesses?
It's a huge impact on the bottom line. I don't think people always necessarily think about all the associated costs of travel. When we think about travel, we think of the cost of, the flights, the cost of the hotel, rental cars, rail, whatever it may be. But we're not taking a minute to think about how much we're spending. If people don't know their policies, if they are spending a ton of time in their day-to-day, we pay our employees well, and they should be spending a majority of their time doing their job and making an impact on the business, not focusing on how they can make business travel work. No one really enjoys business travel. And if we can make it more efficient, why wouldn't we?
And I know you threw some numbers out when we were talking, and I don't recall exactly the context, but I know there was some amazingly big dollars that you've seen in your time, and give us a bit of an idea of what kind of impact they could have on just like a I don't know, small, medium, large business. How does it sort of bucket out?
Yeah, so I think corporate travel is really traditionally focused upmarket, right? Think the Fortune 500 companies that we all know and love, and they have traveled down to a system, right? There's tools in place, there's processes, there's generally someone that's managing this travel, and it's a lot of their full-time job. And it's not that employees want to be bad corporate citizens. A lot of times they're excited to go on these first couple of work trips. But unfortunately, oftentimes policies around travel are either kind of hidden in the background, not wildly clear, or they're just not front of mind for these employees when they're booking. So if you think of the last time you onboarded to a company, how much information you were inundated with versus a year later when you're ready to get on the road, I don't know about you, but I have no idea what was on page 700 of my, employee handbook when I first onboarded. I recently joined the Navan team, and I already probably can't tell you half of what's in that handbook, unfortunately. But really having tools that keep those policies top of mind help employees really become those better corporate citizens. So inside of that, we find that a lot of times people are overspending because they're leaving their travel platforms or they're booking direct with vendors and they're not really clear on those rules. So when the rules and the guidelines are really set up, like I always think of bumpers when you're bowling, at least if you know where the lines are, you know where you're supposed to be really focused. So if you are going directly to a vendor and just picking a flight because you are loyal to a specific airline, rather than having a tool that's very clear on what's inside of your policy, what you can spend based on that specific trip, on both the flight side and the hotel. So at Navan, we realize that not every city and not every trip is created equally. We lovingly like to use the example of Taylor Swift being in town. If I'm booking a hotel on a random Tuesday in July versus on a Saturday night when Taylor Swift is in town, that needs a separate policy. But unfortunately, most policies aren't intelligent enough or proactive enough to make those determinations. So oftentimes there's one sweeping rule across corporate travel. And when there's one sweeping rule, oftentimes we find employees are spending on the top end of that market because they want to stay in the nicer hotels or they want the nicer planes, which I completely understand. I spend a lot of time on the road. No one wants to be stuck in a bad hotel. And so putting these bumpers on ensure that they're not overspending. And in some cases, it's a small team and the overspend doesn't seem to be that much, right? It may be by $10 here, $50 here. But as the business continues to scale, the percentages can really make an impact on that bottom line. So by having these really clear-cut policies in place, we see anywhere from up to 30% in cost savings. We have a ton of awesome case studies on Navan.com that break out how we've been able to take a look at past travel and then the travel after they've implemented tools that really put policy top of mind, but also create really great employee experience. Oftentimes, corporate travel gets a bad rap from a lot of us that live on the road. It's not the most fun thing to leave our families and our homes and our loved ones. So making that process as seamless as possible, but also encouraging them to be good corporate citizens, and continuing to do the right thing by the company can make a huge difference in spend. Like I said, sometimes up to 30%. And there's always new case studies out, which I think are really valuable because they focus on these specific industries. So no matter what type of business these CFOs are working with, I'm sure they can find a case study online that shows exactly where those types of businesses are generally overspending and the impact it can make. Percentages are kind of nice because they're universal across all these industries and business sizes. And when we're looking at insert dollar amount, if it's $10 here and $10 there for a very large business, may not be an impactful metric in profit or loss at the end of the year. But if you're a small business or a startup and every dollar is really being scrutinized, it can make a really impactful difference.
Yeah, I think when you mention that percentage, I think probably a whole bunch of CFOs just moved over and clicked on their financial statements from last quarter and went, "What's on the travel line and how much is 30%?"
Yeah,
and and conservatively 20%. What is that? Because that's significant. And like we just are a small business here, but I remember especially like sort of pre-COVID, we were out and about and all the time, and the costs even for a small business like ours can be pretty heavy because we don't get like big group discounts and things like that. We're trying to find a way to make things comfortable, but cost effective, right? And it's a bit of a tricky balance there.
Yeah, and I'm a very strong believer in, like, you don't need to be an expert in all things, right? I think that leaving expertise to those that are experts in their field are so important. A lot of these big companies that we think of that are getting these really interesting corporate discounted rates have whole departments that's their full-time job to manage those. It's a different type of contract negotiation. It's a different sales process that they're working with these vendors to get these corporate negotiated rates. And when you're working with tools such as Navan, we're able to do that on their behalf and really make those rates and have those negotiations based on all of our booking volume. And so small businesses are able to take advantage of these rates without having to spend the time and resources on those. Because then it becomes kind of a question of opportunity costs, right? If your legal team, maybe it's only a handful of people or outsourced legal teams that you're paying on the hour some really incredible rates, which they're experts in their field. That's how they should be paid and that's how they should be working with the business. But if they're spending their time trying to negotiate rates for your hotel travel, if you're not doing a ton in hotel travel, it's probably not the best use of their time. So let people like us take that to the vendors and have those conversations on their behalf, but they still get all the upside of control over policy, those corporate negotiated rates, and all the upside that all these huge businesses have access to, and small businesses have really been left to the wayside.
So is that what Navan really like focuses on is sort of giving the smaller business or the mid-sized business access to kind of the things that the enterprise type companies already have?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went to market really traditionally, as most corporate management companies do, corporate travel management companies do, where we focused upmarket first, where the market has done well for years and years. These huge distribution systems were built in the late 80s to bring a ton of inventory to these corporations in one place. And so we did the same thing. And then more recently, we realized how underserved the small business market is. We find that most of travel is completely unmanaged, which means they're not having access to any of these tools and rates and oversight. And so by providing these tools to small businesses for free to start off with, allows them access to the upside and all of these rewards that these corporations have had for years without all of that large barrier to entry.
It's just interesting because I'm starting to think about like the process that we always had to go through every time we were booking things. And this is going back like 20 years, even 30 years when, with my first businesses. And, we were doing the usual conference schedule, and we were always figuring out, okay, we're bringing our team along, and how do we do this and try and make it cost effective? And a lot of time went into that to try and figure out, like, do we do hotel rooms? Do we rent out an entire condo or a house, or what do we do? Right. And then the travel actually hits, like the flights and everything too. So it's, to have something that actually helps with that. I can see even for small businesses, like, it would be a huge help, because I've sort of felt that sort of pain myself. But I can see, like, as you start moving up, at what point do you see the break where it's like, okay, they're covered, they got all this stuff internal, they're good?
Almost never, actually. So even these people, like these very large corporations that are managing their travel internally, they're still using a tool or a system in order to do so. That's actually what was interesting about Navan to me, is a lot of times it's difficult for people to get started on a tool because there's this breaking point of, well, if I start on a small business tool that's actually affordable, eventually I'm going to have to unhook that and then go through all the pain around finding a new tool. What's nice about things like Navan is they continue to grow with you. So I really think of small businesses that get started on Google Suite. So here at Navan, we're using Google for all of our internal uses, and a lot of startups do. And one of the reasons is you can get started with Google Suite for very, very low cost. You can get a domain-based email, you can spin up a website, you can share that across, but you don't really need to leave Gmail as you continue to scale. And Navan's very similar. You mentioned like getting CFOs off of these Excel spreadsheets. I'm a big lover of Excel spreadsheets deep down in my core. I'm a nerd. I think you've known that from our first call. But there's a line where you outgrow spreadsheets. Like, could you make it work with enough Band-Aids? Sure. Is it a good experience for anyone? Absolutely not. And that's kind of why I think getting started on these tools earlier on, all of your GL codes are mapped, all of your historical data is there, and it's so important. But it's also a great client experience. I've done a ton of travel. I spent over 100 nights in hotel rooms last year. I thought if anyone knew corporate travel, it was me. And I found out I was so incredibly wrong. I didn't have a good understanding of what our corporate travel policy was. It's not that I wanted to be a bad corporate citizen. It's not that I wanted to book outside of policy. It's not that I wanted to get our poor accounting team in trouble. I just had other focuses. I wasn't reading an employee handbook to make sure I was following all these rules. Should I have been? Probably, but when you have a bunch of fires going on, it falls to the wayside relatively quickly. And so finding these tools that you can set your business up for success long term are so important into just the overall operations and efficiencies of a business. And we all know if your operations and you're wildly efficient are, doing really well, then the financials begin to follow that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you just mentioned that, like, we see businesses and spreadsheets all the time. And honestly, we tell some business owners and our smaller businesses that we talk to, it's like, yeah, you're probably good where you are right now. But there's this tipping point where it just kind of grows and grows. Oh, we're fine. Oh my God,
I'm underwater.
Overwhelmed. Exactly. Yeah. And it seems to flip overnight. And like you said, it's kind of like if you get on that early and you start getting the systems and processes in place, it's just, you can avoid some of that. But if you hit that point and you're scrambling, it's like, well, that's also a lot of incentive to get started, of course. So.
And we talk a lot about cost savings, and cost savings is great. We can never say that your cost savings will be equal to some of these big companies that we often do write-ups on, right? The economies of scale make a big difference there. A lot of times when we see the really flashy high numbers, it's for specific reasons. Maybe they have team members that are really acting outside of policy. Like, that's not the norm. But even, let's say you come to Navan and you don't save a single dollar. First of all, I'd be surprised, but separate of that. If we can set up your internal operations for success and really make your team happier and more excited to get on the road and meet with clients and close deals and do all these things that you're not going to have to spend a ton of time and resources to fix or rectify down the road, that's worth way more than probably the travel savings I could provide to you overnight.
Yeah, no, it's very true. A lot of these things, any sort of these processes are just they're painful,
Yeah.
and you you know, hopefully we're not there to try and make our staff's lives miserable. You know, like
No,
we're,
for sure.
you
And
know,
like
it's
no one wants to change over any of these things. I think like a big buzzword in tech last year was tech debt, that people are acquiring companies or they're bringing on new employees who enjoy using different systems or solutions. And one of the reasons that they end up in this tech debt is no one wants to go through the motion of removing any of these tools. You have 100 things going on in your day. Learning how to move from Outlook to Google for your like email processes or your calendar and everything that that's hooked up to just continues to get pushed down the road. And travel and expense can be the same way. I think
Mhm.
what's nice about Navan is we integrate with a lot of tools and solutions. It's really simple to import or export data depending on how they're managing internally today. And so finding tools and resources separate of just travel and expense, but really across the entire gamut of tech really ensures that you're not overspending down the line or creating a really poor or employee experience.
And I'm going to go somewhere that I don't even know if this is something that you guys deal with or if this actually is an issue. But when you start to talk about all of these different tools and people like, yeah, we got 100 tools and we use these ones and we don't want to move to that one. And like, I get all that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we're always have a really close eye on and we keep trying to really tighten up and pare down is because of security issues. That
Yeah.
when you have 100 apps out there and you've got logins to each, and then they talk to each other, and some of us over here and some of us over there. It's there's just so many more security gaps, and also security gaps not just in the software, but hey, maybe an invoice is paid when it shouldn't have been paid, and it was actually a fake invoice, but it, you know, like things like that you hear all the time. Is that a big concern that you guys see in your area?
Absolutely. I think that's across tech as a whole. So my background, separate of Navan, is really rooted in more of like the tech reseller space. And that's one of the first questions that they always ask, right? Is how secure is this? How is this going to integrate into our tech stack? What kind of risk are we opening up our business to? Because the cost of cyber risk is, we could talk about that for hour and a half on its own.
Yeah.
So Navan, we integrate with single sign-on solutions, which I think is very important. As another side note, if that's not something that people are doing today, that's another low-cost thing that they can implement to ensure that they're not opening themselves up to these risks down the road. But to your point, anytime that you're accessing multiple tools, I think what's fun about Navan is we do not only travel, not only expense, but we can connect your existing cards that you're using all in one place. And so at that point, your employees can reconcile their expense reports and all these things without having to give them access to really vulnerable data. We don't want people logging in and out of bank accounts and exporting your credit card bill at the end of the month. That needs to be looked at. And, you know, I'm sure you're the expert in all things CFO, accounting, office. So like that's a necessary evil to give people access to these things. But the more we can keep it out of, you know, day-to-day employee hands, I think the better.
Yeah, and that is one of the things we're always looking at is like very much a need to know basis. Not because you don't trust employees, because it's like you're trying to limit the little gaps, the little seams, little doors that people can sneak through. And you already mentioned like spreadsheets. That's where a lot of this is done now. And you can imagine if someone actually got hold of your spreadsheet, it's a whole lot easier for them to spoof you and say, "Oh, here's the bill for this hotel that, you know, like." And it's you can kind of see some of the gaps showing up there, and so it's just something I was thinking about when you started talking about this tech stack, and it's again, aside from time savings and ease of use and everything, there's risk management that's also kind of layered on top of that.
Yeah, I'm a really big believer that like inherently people are good people. They want to do the right thing. And I think making it easy for them to do the right thing, like I mentioned, putting policy in front of them. But unfortunately, human error is a huge, huge issue. I think the more times you have human intervention across the process, the odds of something going wrong just increase. It's kind of name of the game. And even moving travel and expense into a platform where there's these bumpers up and they can't make all of these same mistakes, where if they go in to their app on insert airline and accidentally go and upgrade themselves to a non-refundable first class ticket. Do sometimes people do that on purpose? I'm absolutely sure of it. But do I think the mistake also happens that I'm sure that we've all accidentally were scrolling and clicked on a button that we didn't mean to. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, geez, how am I going to explain this to accounting? Now I have to pay this back. Maybe I can't afford it. It could be 100 things. And so really just having those safeguards in place are so important.
Yeah. So actually circling down to Navan, I'd like to get a little bit more information on that. So who do you serve? I know it's a wide range of people, but also who should get in contact with you and how should they get in contact with you?
Yeah. So what's so interesting about travel to me, and obviously I'm new to this space, is our ideal client profile is so wide. Because if you think about who's traveling, it's everything from a very, very small business where maybe they have a service-based industry or consulting or something along those lines that they're inherently on the road, or they could be, 100,000 employee company that obviously there's some inherent travel there if it's just their executive leadership team, and really everything in between. I haven't seen or been able to come up with an industry that once I start talking to people that someone doesn't travel in. I'm from the growth team. And so we really focus on the smaller end of the market. So that under 300 employee space is really our sweet spot. And it's providing these tools to primarily unmanaged travel groups. So that's a lot of my focus. And then I also have a very strong background in partnerships. So I feel so confidently that no better relationship or introduction than through a partner. They know their end client better than a lot of times the client even knows themselves. They're able to take that outsider perspective, understand the gaps, and see how we can make that impactful difference in their business. And so through our partner program, we're able to work with fractional CFOs, consultants, advisors, all these groups that already know these small business inside and out, and add Navan to really their repertoire to say, hey, I think this might be something that could make an impactful difference on your business in that role layout or discovery period, or even after they've been working with them for quite some time. I think we've all done what we thought was the most thorough discovery in the world. And the next thing you know, you've been working with a client for a while and they drop a nugget of information. So anyone in that space, I know it's really wide, but I'd love to have a conversation and see how we can help them better serve their clients. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and then you can also reach out to me on email. It's mhines, Hines @navan.com. And we've got some fun promotions and things coming up as well that I'd love to offer to anyone in your community if they're doing any travel themselves. I always think the best way to work with a partner is have them kind of go through that same client flow for the first time, sign up and see how we work with end clients, because building trust with partners to me is first and foremost. If you don't have a great relationship with your partner, the rest kind of falls to the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll make sure that the your LinkedIn profile, email, all of that is in the show notes. So definitely just look below and you can track Morgan down. Thank you so much, Morgan, for being on the show. This was really enjoyable, really interesting, and as usual, I always selfishly just like to learn about this stuff myself, so I know it, and it was great to be able to just do a Q&A here and learn so much about that myself. And everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, if you're a CFO, fractional CFO, you're buried in spreadsheets for cash flow forecasts, please come and see us at dryrun.com. We're going to help you deliver something that's really clear to management teams and also likely save you a bunch of time and hassle in the meantime. Thanks again, Morgan. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.